What if one visit could signal the beginning of a brand new chapter for a family that spent years divided? For nearly 2 decades, viewers have followed the highs and lows of the Roloff family on Little People, Big World. From weddings and bobbies to business deals and bitter disagreements, the show has captured it all. But in recent years, one storyline seemed to overshadow everything else: the fractured relationship between Zach Roloff and his father, Matt Roloff. After months, even years of public tension, subtle social media shade, and emotional interviews, Zach Roloff just made a surprising statement. He revealed that tensions within his family are finally melting. And now, he and Tori were spotted back at the very place that sparked so much of the conflict, the family farm, known to fans as Roloff Farms. Is this a true reconciliation? A temporary truce? Or simply a peaceful moment before the next chapter unfolds? Because when it comes to the Roloff family, history has shown us that nothing is ever simple. Today, we're breaking down what Zach meant when he said tensions were melting, why this farm visit matters more than fans realize, what this could mean for his relationship with Matt, and whether this signals a permanent shift in the family dynamic. Let's dive in. For longtime viewers, the farm isn't just property. It's symbolic. It represents legacy, childhood memories, and years of hard work. But it also became the center of one of the most emotional disputes in the family's history. When discussions began about the future ownership of the farm, many fans assumed Zach would eventually take over. After all, he had been heavily involved for years and had openly expressed interest in continuing the legacy. But negotiations didn't go as expected. Instead of a smooth transition, conversations reportedly broke down. Emotions ran high. Interviews became more guarded. And before long, Zach and Tori made the life-changing decision to move their family away from the farm property. That move felt final. It wasn't just about geography, it symbolized distance. Distance from the land, distance from daily interaction, and perhaps distance from Matt himself. Over time, viewers noticed subtle signs of strain: fewer public appearances together, less shared content, carefully worded responses in interviews. Even as the family continued to celebrate holidays and milestones, there was an underlying tension that fans couldn't ignore. So when Zach recently said that tensions were melting, it immediately caught attention. Melting is an interesting word. It doesn't suggest a dramatic breakthrough. It doesn't imply a single emotional conversation that solved everything overnight. Instead, it paints a picture of something gradual: ice slowly softening, walls quietly lowering. It suggests time has done what arguments could not. And that's what makes the farm visit so significant. Because going back to Roloff Farms isn't casual. It's not just dropping by a neighbor's house. For Zach and Tori, stepping onto that property again, especially publicly, carries emotional weight. Fans quickly began asking questions. Was this a one-time visit? Was it for the kids? Or was it a sign that communication between Zach and Matt has genuinely improved? To understand why this moment feels so big, you have to revisit what the farm represented during the fallout. When Matt made the decision to sell a portion of the property rather than pass it directly to one of the kids, it sparked debate across the fanbase. Some sided with Matt, arguing that as the owner, he had every right to determine its future. Others felt Zach's disappointment was understandable, especially given his long-standing involvement. The situation became more than a business disagreement. It became personal. On TLC interviews and in post-show commentary, emotions were visible, words were measured, and at times, silence spoke louder than statements. So seeing Zach and Tori back at the farm now feels like something has shifted. But here, where things get interesting. Reconciliation in families, especially ones that have lived much of their lives in front of cameras, rarely happens in one dramatic scene. It happens in small gestures. A visit, a shared holiday, a public acknowledgement that things are improving. When Zach says tensions are melting, it may mean conversations are happening behind closed doors. It may mean both sides are choosing peace over pride. Or it may simply mean enough time has passed for emotions to cool. Another key factor: the grandchildren. Jackson, Lila, and Josiah have always been at the heart of this family story. And fans have long speculated that maintaining strong grandparent relationships could naturally soften old disagreements. It's difficult to stay divided when birthdays, milestones, and school events bring everyone back into the same room. And let's not forget, despite the disagreements, Zach has never publicly denied the importance of family. Even during the height of the tension, he framed the issue as a business disagreement that turned emotional, not a permanent severing of ties. That distinction matters. It leaves room for healing. Now, does this farm visit mean Zach is reconsidering anything about ownership? There's no evidence of that, and it would be speculation to suggest a business reversal. But reconciliation doesn't require a property deal. Sometimes it just requires understanding. Fans are also wondering what this means for Zach's dynamic with Matt moving forward. Will we see more visits? More shared moments? Perhaps even collaborative events at the farm? It's possible. But it's also possible that this is simply a healthier new normal: separate households, separate lives, but less tension. There's something powerful about the idea that not every conflict has to end in permanent division. Sometimes, space is necessary. Distance can provide clarity. And once emotions settle, relationships can be rebuilt in new ways, not identical to before, but functional and peaceful. For a family whose journey has been documented since 2006, growth has always been part of the story. Divorce, remarriage, children growing up, business changes. Through it all, one theme remains consistent: evolution. So maybe this isn't about returning to the past. Maybe it's about redefining the future. A future where Zach and Matt don't necessarily agree on everything, but can coexist without the weight of unresolved resentment. Of course, longtime viewers know better than to declare everything fixed. The Roloff family dynamic has always been layered. Personalities are strong. Opinions run deep. But progress doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Sometimes, it's as simple as showing up. And right now, that's what fans are seeing. Zach showed up. Tori showed up. The kids were there. And the farm, once the epicenter of conflict, became the backdrop for what looks like a calmer chapter. Whether this signals a permanent shift or just a moment of peace, one thing is clear: something has changed. The word melting implies warmth returning where there was once frost. And for a family that has weathered public disagreements, that warmth matters. The question now is whether the past can be erased. It's whether the future can be written differently. If tensions truly are melting, we may be witnessing the quiet rebuilding of a relationship that once seemed permanently strained. And for fans who have invested years into watching this family grow, stumble, and evolve, that possibility feels significant. Because sometimes the most meaningful chapters aren't the loudest ones. They're the quiet returns. The small steps. The moments when pride softens, conversations resume, and family, in all its complicated beauty, finds a way forward. For nearly 2 decades, viewers have followed the ups and downs of the Roloff family on Little People, Big World. What began as a look into the daily lives of a family navigating dwarfism grew into something much bigger: a multi-generational story about love, ambition, conflict, and change. Marriages were celebrated, divorces unfolded, children grew up on camera, and through it all, one place remained the emotional centerpiece of the entire journey: Roloff Farms. From pumpkin seasons packed with visitors to private family milestones tucked away behind the scenes, the farm was more than just land. It was legacy. In recent seasons, that legacy became the source of one of the deepest fractures the family has experienced. Negotiations over the future of the property, specifically whether one of the children would purchase a portion of it, didn't just fall apart. They collapsed under the weight of expectations, assumptions, and years of unspoken tension. At the center of that breakdown were Zach and his father, Matt Roloff. What started as business discussions about acreage, pricing, and long-term plans quickly turned personal. Zach later acknowledged that the disagreement permanently shifted how he viewed certain relationships within the family. It wasn't simply about money. It was about trust, about feeling heard, about whether the next generation would truly be given the chance to carry forward what had been built. Viewers watched the fallout unfold in real time. Conversations became strained. Body language changed. Words were measured more carefully or avoided altogether. Eventually, Zach and Tori made the decision to move their young family to Washington, creating both physical and emotional distance from the farm. For many fans, that relocation symbolized something bigger than geography. It felt like a closing chapter. Meanwhile, the farm itself remained under Matt's control, with his longtime partner, Karin Chandler, often at his side. Their presence on the property and their involvement in its operations added another layer to an already complex dynamic. And hovering over all of it was the history between Matt and Amy Roloff, whose divorce years earlier had already reshaped the family's foundation. So when Zach recently opened up and used the word melting to describe the tensions within his brood, both immediate and extended, it caught fans off guard. He didn't say everything was fixed. He didn't claim apologies had erased the past. But he acknowledged something subtle and important. The sharp edges of the conflict no longer feel as sharp. That distinction matters. Because in families, especially families who have lived so much of their lives publicly, healing rarely arrives in dramatic speeches or cinematic reconciliations. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in small gestures, in softened tones, in the willingness to show up again. And that's exactly what happened next. Shortly after speaking about tensions easing, Zach and Tori made a visit back to Roloff Farms, the very place that once symbolized division. For longtime viewers, this wasn't just a casual drop-in during pumpkin season. It wasn't simply about bringing the kids to see Grandpa. It was layered. Walking back onto that property meant stepping into history, into unresolved conversations, into memories, both joyful and painful. The farm has always represented more than acreage. It represents childhood for Zach. It represents ambition for Matt. It represents compromise and closure for Amy. And for the next generation, Jackson, Lila, and Josiah, it represents connection to their roots. That's why fans immediately began reading between the lines. Was this a turning point? A temporary truce? Or simply two parents prioritizing their children over old disagreements? Body language in shared photos appeared relaxed. The children looked comfortable. There was no visible tension, at least not outwardly. And in a family that has often worn its emotions openly, that calm presence spoke volumes. It doesn't erase what happened. The failed farm deal remains a defining moment in the family's story. Zach has been candid about how deeply it affected him, how it altered his perception of fairness and loyalty within the family structure. But time has a way of shifting perspective. Parenthood changes priorities. Distance can cool emotions. And sometimes, when expectations fade, space opens for something more sustainable, not necessarily the closeness of the past, but a workable peace. What makes this moment especially significant is that it didn't come during a dramatic on-camera reunion episode. It unfolded more quietly, through casual remarks and subtle actions. No grand announcement. No headline declaring reconciliation. Just a visit. Just presence. And for viewers who have invested nearly 20 years watching this family evolve, that simplicity carries weight. Because if Roloff Farms has been the symbolic epicenter of both unity and division, then stepping back onto that land together, even briefly, signals something worth noticing. Maybe not a full circle moment, but perhaps the beginning of a new shape altogether. Segment 1, What ZACH meant by tensions melting. 6002000. When Zach described tensions as melting, longtime viewers of Little People, Big World immediately leaned in. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It wasn't a headline-grabbing reconciliation. It wasn't even a clear confirmation that everything between him and his dad was fixed. It was subtle, measured, almost cautious. And that's exactly why it mattered. The context behind Zach's words. For years, the farm dispute has been the emotional core of the family's public divide. After negotiations over a portion of Roloff Farms fell apart, the relationship between Zach and his father, Matt Roloff, noticeably shifted. Zach didn't hide his disappointment. He spoke openly about feeling hurt by how the process unfolded. From his perspective, this wasn't just a business deal. It was about legacy, family, and the dream of raising his own children on the same land where he grew up. Meanwhile, Matt maintained a different stance. He framed the situation as a complex business decision. The farm, in his view, wasn't just an emotional symbol. It was a financial asset, a liability, and a long-term responsibility. He often emphasized the practical realities of maintaining and operating such a large property. That fundamental difference, emotion versus business, became the fault line. How long the tensions have existed. The divide didn't appear overnight. Viewers of Little People, Big World watched as negotiations slowly unraveled across episodes. What began as hopeful conversations gradually turned into visible frustration. There were awkward family gatherings. There were strained body language moments. There were carefully worded interviews. And eventually, there was distance. Zach and Tori Roloff made the decision to move their family to Washington. The relocation wasn't framed as a dramatic exit, but the timing was impossible to ignore. The move symbolized a shift, not just geographically, but emotionally. For many fans, that relocation marked the peak of the divide. The emotional impact of the farm dispute. To understand why tensions melting feels significant, you have to understand what the farm represents. Roloff Farms isn't just land. It's the backdrop of childhood memories. It's where family milestones were celebrated. It's the physical foundation of a show that ran for nearly 2 decades. For Zach, the idea of raising his children there likely carried deep sentimental weight. For Matt, protecting the farm's long-term viability may have felt equally important. But emotional investments don't always align with financial ones. And when expectations collide, especially between parent and child, the fallout can linger. Fans saw that lingering tension in interviews. Zach's tone at times carried disappointment. Matt's tone carried defensiveness. Neither appeared indifferent. If anything, the intensity suggested how much the issue meant to both of them. That's why the word melting resonates. Because ice only forms where there was once warmth. How time and distance shift perspectives. Time changes the emotional temperature of almost everything. When Zach and Tori built their life in Washington, their focus shifted. Their world became about school schedules, birthday parties, routines, and raising 3 children away from the daily orbit of the farm. Distance can sometimes harden resentment, but sometimes it does the opposite. Without constant proximity to the source of conflict, emotions have room to cool. Conversations become less reactive. Hurt becomes less raw. Priorities evolve. Parenthood especially has a way of reframing things. When your energy is centered on your own kids, the urgency of past disputes can soften. Not disappear, but soften. Zach didn't say everything was resolved. That distinction is important. He didn't say apologies were exchanged. He didn't say negotiations were revisited. He didn't say the past was erased. He said tensions were melting. That suggests gradual movement, not a dramatic thaw, but a slow shift. A sign of maturity, not drama. What makes this moment stand out is how understated it is. Reality television often thrives on explosive reconciliations or emotional confrontations. But this wasn't that. It was quiet growth, subtle acknowledgement, emotional evolution. For years, fans speculated about whether the divide would ever heal. Some assumed it was permanent. Others believed time would eventually ease things. Zach's wording hints that perhaps that easing has begun. Not a full reunion. Not a grand announcement. But a lessening of tension. And sometimes, in family dynamics, that's the most realistic form of progress. Why fans are reading between the lines. The Roloff family has shared so much of their lives publicly that viewers have become skilled at interpreting tone shifts and phrasing. When Zach chose the word melting, fans recognized it as intentional. It conveys softness. It implies something that was once solid is gradually loosening. It doesn't promise a perfect relationship. It doesn't erase the business dispute. It doesn't rewrite history. But it does suggest that the emotional freeze may not be permanent. And that alone feels meaningful. The bigger picture. At its core, this isn't just about land. It's about expectations between generations. It's about how adult children and parents redefine relationships once roles shift. When Zach stepped back from the farm, he wasn't just stepping away from property. He was stepping into his own independent chapter. And perhaps now, with that independence firmly established, the urgency of the old conflict has faded. Sometimes distance creates clarity. Sometimes new responsibilities bring perspective. Sometimes time does what arguments never could. If tensions are indeed melting, it may not be because someone won. It may be because both sides simply reached a place where holding onto the conflict no longer felt necessary. And for a family that has navigated divorce, business disputes, public scrutiny, and generational change under a television spotlight, even small emotional shifts matter. Zach's comment may not signal a full-circle reunion, but it signals movement. And after years of visible strain, movement, however gradual, is a story in itself. Segment 2, The Farm Visit. Why It Matters 20-003500. Roloff Farms isn't just a piece of land in Oregon. It's history. It's childhood laughter echoing across open fields. It's pumpkin season chaos, family traditions, and the backdrop to nearly 2 decades of television memories on Little People, Big World. So when Zach Roloff and Tori Roloff were seen back at the farm, fans didn't treat it like a casual drop-in. They treated it like a statement. Because context matters. This isn't just any property. It's the symbolic center of the Roloff family's story, the place where marriages began, where arguments unfolded, where business deals fractured relationships, and where generational dreams collided with reality. For years, the farm has represented both unity and division. So a return, even a quiet one, carries emotional weight. The symbolism of going back. After the very public tensions surrounding the farm sale negotiations, many viewers believed that bridge had been burned for good. Discussions between Zach and his father about purchasing part of the property didn't end the way fans hoped. The disappointment was visible. The distance that followed felt real. Which is why this visit matters. Returning to a place tied to unresolved tension suggests something has shifted, even if only slightly. You don't casually step back into emotionally loaded territory unless there's some level of peace, especially not with your children. Bringing the kids into that environment sends a message without anyone saying a word. It suggests safety. It suggests comfort. It suggests that whatever friction once existed may no longer be sharp enough to keep them away. And that quiet symbolism is powerful. Fans react in real time. Online reaction was immediate. Comment sections lit up with variations of the same question. Is this a reconciliation? Some fans expressed cautious optimism. Others tried not to read too much into it. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: it felt significant. Longtime viewers of Little People, Big World understand the emotional geography of this family. They've watched milestones unfold on that land. They've seen birthday parties, pumpkin seasons, business expansions, and deeply personal confrontations happen there. So when Zach and Tori returned, it didn't feel random. It felt intentional, even if it wasn't announced as such. Body language speaks louder than words. One of the most discussed aspects of the visit wasn't what was said, but how it looked. Observers noted a lighter energy. Relaxed posture, natural smiles, unforced interactions. There was no visible tension, no stiff exchanges, no awkward distance captured in the background. For a family that has experienced public strain, body language becomes the subtext fans analyze. And in this case, the subtext seemed calm. Comfortable. Normal. And sometimes, normal is extraordinary. Because when relationships have been strained, normalcy is often the first milestone toward healing. Was Matt there? Another major point of curiosity centered around whether Matt Roloff was present during the visit. There was no dramatic group photo, no staged "we're back together" moment. And perhaps that's what made it feel authentic. If Matt was present, the interaction appeared low-key. If he wasn't, the very act of Zach returning to the property still signals a softening of boundaries. Either scenario suggests something important. The emotional door is no longer firmly shut. Fans also wondered about the involvement of other family members, siblings, extended relatives, longtime farm staff. But again, the absence of spectacle may be the most telling detail. This didn't look like a public relations moment. It looked like a family visit. The children change everything. There's another layer to this that fans can't ignore: the kids. When parents navigate complicated family dynamics, their decisions often shift once children are involved. Memories matter. Traditions matter. Grandparent relationships matter. Roloff Farms represents an entire chapter of Zach's own childhood, and allowing his children to experience that same space suggests he doesn't want them cut off from that legacy. That choice speaks louder than any interview could. Because protecting children from conflict often requires growth from adults. And growth rarely happens overnight. Why this isn't about business? It's important to separate this visit from past business disagreements. The farm has always been both a home and a commercial operation. That dual identity complicated everything. Emotional attachment met financial negotiation, and that combination rarely ends smoothly. But this visit didn't feel transactional. There were no public hints about property deals, no announcements about ownership, no visible business agenda. Instead, it looked personal. And that distinction changes the narrative. Because reconciliation in families often begins outside of contracts and negotiations. It starts with presence, with small moments, with showing up. The quiet nature of healing. What makes this moment compelling isn't drama. It's the lack of it. In reality television culture, we're conditioned to expect loud reconciliations, tearful apologies, public declarations, grand gestures. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes healing looks like a short visit, a shared laugh, children running across familiar fields, adults choosing calm over conflict. It's subtle, and subtle can be powerful. The absence of tension may not trend the way controversy does, but for longtime fans, it might be the most meaningful development yet. Fans are hopeful but careful. There's also an undercurrent of caution among viewers. They've seen ups and downs before. They understand that one visit doesn't erase years of complicated history. But hope doesn't require certainty. It only requires possibility. And this visit introduced possibility. Possibility that conversations are happening privately. Possibility that time has softened old frustrations. Possibility that family, despite everything, still matters more than pride. Why location carries emotion. Places hold memory. And Roloff Farms holds more than most. It witnessed the marriage of Amy Roloff and Matt. It became the central character of their divorce storyline. It fueled debates about inheritance, fairness, and legacy. It's not just land. It's narrative. So stepping back onto that land isn't neutral. It's emotional. It's layered. And for Zach, who once envisioned raising his own children there, the act of returning carries personal significance that cameras can't fully capture. A shift in tone. If there's one word that defines this visit, it's gentle. No announcements, no dramatic music, no viral confrontation. Just presence. And after years of tension dominating headlines, gentleness feels new. It feels intentional. It feels like maturity. Because sometimes the strongest statement a family can make isn't through a press release. It's through peaceful coexistence. What this could mean going forward. Does this confirm a full reconciliation? Not necessarily. But it suggests movement. And movement matters. Families rarely heal in one sweeping moment. They heal in increments, in shared spaces, in quiet decisions to try again. If nothing else, this visit demonstrates openness. And openness is the foundation of rebuilding. For fans who have invested nearly 2 decades into watching this family evolve, that small step feels meaningful. Because sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's subtle. A visit. A shared moment. A small step. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something steadier than before. Segment 3, where this leaves ZACH and MATT 35, 0050, 00. At the center of the entire farm dispute, the interviews, the silence, the speculation, the emotional fallout, is one relationship that has always carried the most weight. The bond between Zach Roloff and Matt Roloff. Strip away the business headlines, remove the property negotiations, ignore the internet rumors. What remains is a father and a son who once worked side by side on the same land that shaped both of them, but in very different ways. And that difference is important. For Matt, the farm was a vision, a dream, a project that began long before television cameras ever arrived. He built Roloff Farms from raw acreage into a recognizable brand, pumpkin seasons, elaborate structures, family attractions. It was entrepreneurship, creativity, risk-taking. It was his life's work. For Zach, the farm wasn't a business concept. It was childhood. It was growing up among barns and fields. It was playing on pirate ships and castles. It was family memories woven into physical space. When you grow up somewhere, you don't just see structures, you see moments. Birthdays, arguments, lessons, identity. Those two perspectives don't cancel each other out. But they do collide. And that collision became public in ways most families never experience. Because this wasn't just a private disagreement. It unfolded under the spotlight of little people, big world. Viewers didn't just hear that there was tension, they watched it happen. They saw interviews where tones shifted. They heard disappointment in carefully chosen words. They sensed frustration when expectations didn't align. Over time, both Zach and Matt made public comments that revealed how deep the divide had become. Matt spoke about business decisions, about valuations, investments, and what he believed was fair from a financial standpoint. He framed the situation through the lens of ownership and sustainability. From his perspective, this was about protecting what he had built. Zach, on the other hand, expressed hurt, not just about numbers, but about what the outcome symbolized. To him, it wasn't only a negotiation, it felt personal. It felt like a missed opportunity for legacy to stay within reach. That's the part that many viewers related to. Because beneath every property dispute lies something bigger: expectation. What did each side assume would happen? What conversations were had off camera? What promises were implied but never formally stated? We don't know every detail, and likely we never will. But what we do know is this: the fallout changed their dynamic. When Zach and Tori stepped back from the show and relocated, it wasn't just geographic distance. It symbolized emotional distance too. Less proximity, fewer spontaneous visits, fewer casual overlaps at the farm. And yet, family ties don't dissolve as cleanly as business partnerships. Because there are children involved. Grandchildren have a way of reshaping conflict in ways logic never can. When a son becomes a father, priorities evolve. When a father becomes a grandfather, perspectives shift. Suddenly, the argument that once felt urgent may begin to feel secondary. Time does something interesting to pride. It softens edges. The grandchildren represent continuity, something bigger than the original disagreement. School events, holidays, milestones, shared laughter that doesn't care about property lines or past negotiations. And viewers have noticed subtle shifts over time. Moments where interactions seem less tense, occasional appearances that suggest doors aren't fully closed, small gestures that hint at thawing ground. Reconciliation, if it's happening, may not look dramatic. There may not be a public apology or a sit-down special episode declaring everything resolved. Real reconciliation is often quieter than that. It shows up in showing up. It shows up in attending a birthday party, in standing next to each other for a photo, in choosing connection over commentary. And that brings us to one of the most complicated layers of all: business versus family boundaries. When family and business intertwine, lines blur quickly. Decisions that are financially rational can feel emotionally loaded. Boundaries that are necessary for sustainability can feel like rejection. Matt approaches life as a builder and entrepreneur. Zach approaches it as someone who lived inside the product of that entrepreneurship. Neither is inherently wrong, but they operate from different emotional starting points. The farm to Matt is an asset and a legacy. The farm to Zach is a memory and a belonging. Those definitions overlap, but they are not identical. As years pass, however, the urgency of proving who was right tends to fade. What becomes more valuable is access. Access to grandchildren, access to shared holidays, access to the chance to rewrite the narrative moving forward. And perhaps that is where this story truly sits right now. Not in a place of dramatic reconciliation, not in a place of total estrangement, but in a space that many families quietly occupy, learning how to coexist after disappointment. The reality is, father-son relationships evolve over time, especially when both men are strong-willed, especially when cameras amplify every misstep. What once felt like a defining battle may one day be remembered as a difficult chapter. And as the grandchildren grow older, shared experiences may gradually outweigh old grievances. Because at some point, preserving connection becomes more important than preserving position. Time has a way of reshuffling what feels urgent. What once felt like a line in the sand can begin to feel like a line that can be stepped over slowly, carefully, intentionally. If tensions are indeed melting, it may not be because the original disagreement was fully resolved. It may simply be because priorities shifted. And when priorities shift from property to presence, from valuation to visitation, from winning to belonging, that's when healing becomes possible. Not perfect, but possible. Segment 4, What This Means for the Future 50-0058-00. For years, viewers of Little People, Big World have watched the Roloff family navigate emotional highs and very public lows. From farm negotiations to personal heartbreaks, the story has often felt divided: separate households, separate paths, separate priorities. So when fans sense even a subtle shift toward unity, it matters. Not because anyone expects a fairy tale reunion, but because peace, even quiet peace, is powerful. If this recent visit truly signals a turning point, it could reshape the future of the family dynamic in meaningful ways. Let's talk about what that might look like. First, the possibility of more joint family appearances. For a long time, fans have grown accustomed to seeing the family in fragments. Amy Roloff living her life with Chris Merrick, Matt Roloff moving forward with Karen Chandler, the children building their own lives in different cities and states. public interactions often felt cautious, limited, sometimes strained. But if recent developments reflect genuine emotional growth, we could begin to see more shared milestones again. Graduations, birthdays, holiday gatherings, community events at the farm. Not forced for cameras, not staged for ratings. Just natural overlap because tension has softened. And that would be significant. It doesn't require everyone to suddenly become best friends. It simply requires respect. And respect creates space. Space for shared laughter without discomfort. Space for grandchildren to experience extended family without underlying stress. Space for coexisting peacefully. That alone would be a powerful evolution. Then there's the possibility of future collaborations. While the original structure of the show may have changed, the Roloff name is still strongly associated with the farm, the family legacy, and nearly 2 decades of reality television history. Fans have often wondered, could there ever be a special reunion episode, a holiday feature, a limited series update? Nothing suggests that's currently planned. But emotional maturity opens doors that previously felt locked. When communication improves, collaboration becomes possible. Whether that means appearing together at charity events, sharing farm updates jointly, or even participating in anniversary specials connected to the legacy of TLC, the foundation for those opportunities would be emotional stability. Without that, everything feels performative. With it, everything feels authentic. And authenticity is what audiences crave now more than ever. Another critical element here is the emotional maturity required to step forward. Let's be honest, history doesn't disappear. Divorce leaves marks. Business disagreements leave scars. Words exchanged in heated moments don't evaporate. The Roloff family has faced all of that. Publicly. And stepping into the same physical space again, willingly, suggests something important. They're choosing peace over pride. That's not easy. Especially when millions of viewers have opinions. Emotional maturity doesn't mean forgetting past hurt. It means deciding that holding onto it is more exhausting than letting it go. If that's what we're witnessing, even in small increments, it speaks to growth. Growth that likely didn't happen overnight. Growth that may have required private conversations, therapy, boundaries, distance, time. Lots of time. And fans are noticing. The response online has shifted in tone. Instead of constant speculation about conflict, many comment sections are expressing cautious optimism. Viewers are saying things like, "This feels healthier. The kids deserve this. It's good to see everyone moving forward." There's less hunger for drama and more appreciation for stability. That's an interesting evolution in itself. For years, reality TV thrived on conflict. But longtime fans of this family don't necessarily want explosive arguments anymore. They want resolution. They want healing. They want reassurance that the emotional storms of the past have calmed. And that shift in fan response matters. Because audience energy influences narrative direction. When fans celebrate peace instead of tension, it reinforces healthier dynamics. It tells the family, whether consciously or subconsciously, that unity is valued more than division. Another future implication is for the next generation. The grandchildren are growing up in a different environment than their parents did. They're watching how adults handle conflict, how adults reconcile, how adults show up. If the family continues to demonstrate respectful coexistence, that becomes the new normal. Not whispered disagreements, not visible discomfort at gatherings, not forced smiles for public appearances, but genuine calm. That generational impact could be one of the most meaningful outcomes of all. And then there's the farm itself. While ownership and business decisions have created past tension, the emotional atmosphere surrounding it could soften if relationships stabilize. The farm doesn't have to symbolize division. It can symbolize legacy. shared memories. A place where grandchildren run across familiar fields without understanding the history of negotiations that once felt so heavy. That's a powerful reframe. Of course, none of this suggests perfection. Progress is rarely linear. There may still be disagreements. There may still be distance. There may still be boundaries in place. And that's healthy. Healthy relationships aren't defined by constant closeness. They're defined by mutual understanding. If the Roloffs are building that understanding, step by step, it deserves acknowledgement. Because after navigating divorce, remarriage, business disputes, and relocation, even small steps forward represent resilience. The melting of tension doesn't erase history, but it does suggest something hopeful. History no longer controls the present. The past becomes context, not a cage. And for a family that has lived so much of its life in front of cameras, that evolution is significant. Fans aren't demanding dramatic reconciliations. They're hoping for peace. Not loud declarations, not grand gestures. Just visible healing. And if this visit, this moment, marks the beginning of a quieter, steadier chapter, it could redefine the narrative moving forward. Not as a story of fracture, but as a story of growth. And sometimes, growth is the most compelling storyline of all. In the end, Zach and Tori's return to the farm didn't arrive with a dramatic press conference or a tearful on-camera reunion. There were no sweeping declarations, no perfectly scripted reconciliation moments. Instead, what fans witnessed was something far more subtle and perhaps far more meaningful. For years, viewers of Little People, Big World have watched the complicated evolution of the Roloff family dynamic. The farm negotiations created a fracture that felt bigger than property lines or purchase prices. It became symbolic of generational transition, unmet expectations, hurt feelings, and pride on all sides. When Zach Roloff stepped away from the possibility of owning part of Roloff Farms, many fans saw it as the closing of a chapter that had been building for nearly 2 decades. But time has a way of softening what once felt sharp. Zach's recent acknowledgement that emotions are melting may seem like a small phrase, yet for longtime followers, it speaks volumes. It doesn't suggest everything has been resolved. It doesn't erase disagreements, and it certainly doesn't rewrite the past. What it signals instead is maturity, the kind that comes not from winning, but from healing. Growth doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like showing up. Sometimes it looks like bringing your kids back to a place filled with complicated memories. Sometimes it looks like choosing connection over conflict. For Tori Roloff, the visit also carries quiet significance. She has stood beside Zach through every high and low, including the disappointment surrounding the farm deal. Her willingness to step back onto that land speaks to something deeper than nostalgia. It suggests openness. A recognition that family history, even when messy, is still family history. And then there's the farm itself. Roloff Farms has never just been a backdrop. It has been a character in its own right, the setting for childhood milestones, pumpkin seasons, weddings, disagreements, dreams, and departures. It represents legacy, identity, roots. For so long, it felt like the epicenter of division. Now it may slowly become a space of reconnection. No one is claiming that everything is perfect. There are still complexities within the broader family dynamic. There are still business decisions to be made and personal boundaries to maintain. But what this visit suggests is that the story isn't frozen in conflict. It's evolving. Fans who have followed this journey from the early days understand that relationships change. Parents age. Children grow up. Perspectives shift. What once felt like a permanent rift can gradually transform into something more manageable, even peaceful. If this truly marks the beginning of softer edges and steadier conversations, it won't happen overnight. Healing rarely does. But progress often begins with moments exactly like this. A visit without drama, a statement without bitterness, a step forward without conditions. And perhaps that's why this seemingly simple trip matters so much. Because sometimes the quietest gestures carry the deepest meaning. The farm will always be woven into the Roloff family's story. But maybe now it can return as common ground rather than contested territory, a place where grandchildren can play, where memories can coexist with boundaries, and where growth is measured not in acres, but in understanding. If that's the direction this family is heading, then this visit won't just be remembered as another update in an ongoing saga. It may very well be remembered as a turning point. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.